free, break every yoke. And so he's got a little snippet from Isaiah 58:6 thrown in there. They go with it again, mishandling the text. How about, instead of mishandling the text, how about understanding that as Yeshua reads these words, to also draw attention to another passage, the assumption being that they know the passage as well, he also puts in a verse or part of a verse from Isaiah 58:6 about the true meaning of Sabbath, which often comes out as a major issue, and how Sabbath itself should be a day of liberation. I was amazed when I saw there was a big objection, and this, look, it's creative, mistranslation. No, he's quoting Isaiah 61 with a phrase also from Isaiah 58. Maybe eyebrows would be raised. You read it and you look up. Yeah, Isaiah 58 too. That's relevant as well. Sabbath is a day of liberation, because there's a constant conflict that Yeshua had with some of the religious leaders over this. So this is a quotation from the opening verses of Isaiah 61 with a phrase taken from Isaiah 58 verse 6 put in. That's it. It's no big deal. There's no massive conspiracy here. There's not Luke rewriting the Bible. Assuming he's quoting exactly what happened accurately, Yeshua is reading some of these verses, and as he's reading them, he's bringing a phrase from another passage. Actually, in the readings from the prophets, you'd often have several verses from this chapter, a few verses from here, a few verses from here. He's just interspersing it, but I believe he's interspersing it with meaning. Again, you could look at how stupid he misquoted the thing, and Luke was stupid enough to misquote it. Or you could say that there's significance, there's intent behind it. If I said, you know the verse, for God so loved the world, and whoever's not written in the book of life, you know the... Well, hang on, I just quoted together part of John 3:16 and part of Revelation chapter 20, verse 15. Was I stupidly misquoting? Or was I assuming you know the end of John 3:16, whoever doesn't believe will perish, and that you also know the end of Revelation 20:15, that whoever's name is not written in the book of life is cast into the lake of fire? So if I'm doing it, you're going to assume that I knew what I was doing, especially if I put it in writing, right? And then you'll look up the connection and get the full meaning. If I didn't know the verse I was quoting and was making it up and said, you know, it says for like Mickey Mouse, what is that? Mickey Mouse loved the world? Or so we're not dealing with that. We're dealing with Luke, careful author, looking at his sources, sifting them through. And this is so simple, I don't want to belabor it. But Jesus quotes from Isaiah 61 with a reference to Isaiah 58, which is also a very important chapter in terms of the true meaning of the Sabbath, because he spent much of his earthly ministry seeking to bring that to pass. What about Deuteronomy 30, verses 12 and 13? Let's go back to that. Deuteronomy 30, verses 12 and 13. We'll begin reading in verse 11. Now what I'm commanding you today is not too difficult for you or beyond your reach. It is not up in heaven so that you have to ask who will ascend into heaven to get it, proclaim it so we may obey it. Nor is it beyond the sea so that you have to ask who will cross the sea to get it and proclaim it to us so we may obey it. No, the word is very near you. It's in your mouth and in your heart so you may obey it. So Paul takes those words about it's near you, it's in your mouth and in your heart, and he now applies it in Romans chapter 10. Romans chapter 10. And this is what he comes up with. Verse 6, the righteousness that is by faith says, do not say in your heart, who will ascend into heaven, that is to bring Messiah down, or who will ascend into the deep, that is to bring Messiah up from the dead. But what does it say? The word is near you, it is in your mouth and in your heart. That is the word of faith we are proclaiming. Is he claiming that Deuteronomy 30 was initially prophesying who's going to go up to heaven to bring the Messiah down, who's going to go in the depths to raise him from the dead? I don't believe so for a moment. This is a good example of rabbinic midrash. This is a good example of a homiletical interpretation. We have the Talmudic rabbis interpreting Deuteronomy 30 to fit their own scheme homiletically, and they're drawn to the words in your heart, in your mouth, and they interpret it according to their system. And Paul, as a good rabbinic Jew, is just giving a homiletical interpretation of this. Now, I'm going to come back to Paul a little later in the week. I'm going to come back to Paul and look at the challenges against Paul's interpretation and a Jewish assessment. Jewish scholars speaking of his interpretation. But what you'll be amazed to see is that many Jewish scholars say that Paul's thinking is thoroughly Jewish. And you can only understand Paul's writing when you understand it Jewishly. So I do not believe that Paul is saying that Deuteronomy 30 is a prophecy of the coming of the Messiah or the resurrection of the Messiah. If it was meant as a prophecy, it is certainly not what Deuteronomy 30 was saying. But I don't see that for a split second. I see Paul with a homiletical interpretation. In other words, good preaching from this verse, opening it up, not just bringing his words, but saying here in the language of Scripture, let me bring this message to you. And what's the key to him is that the word is near you. It's in your heart, in your mouth. And he says, that's it. If you confess with your mouth Jesus is Lord, believe in your heart God raised him from the dead, you'll be saved. So he finds this reference to heart and mouth, opens it up. But I believe this is just good homiletical preaching using the Scripture in the rabbinic method of the day. But we'll come back to that later on. So let's look at one last passage in some depth, and then two others very quickly. Daniel 9, verses 24 to 27. We looked at that yesterday in terms of this is a passage that indicates that before the second temple was destroyed, atonement and redemption had to be set in place. Daniel 9, verses 24 to 27. 77s are decreed for your people in your holy city to finish transgression, to put an end to sin, to atone for wickedness, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. And there is a possibility it could be translated the most holy one, or most holy place. No one understands this. From the issuing of the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the anointed one, the ruler, comes, there will be 77 sevens and 62 sevens. It will be rebuilt with streets and a trench, but in times of trouble. After the 62 sevens, the anointed one will be cut off, they will have nothing. The people of the ruler who will come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end will come like a flood. War will continue until the end, and desolations have been decreed. He will confirm a covenant with many for 1 7. In the middle of the sevens, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering. On a wing of the temple, he will set up an abomination that causes desolation until the end that is decreed is poured out on him. Some of this is somewhat difficult to understand. Many different interpretations of some of the words. But I'm not going to confuse you. I'm going to make this as simple as I can. There are lots of battles to fight. You always hear the expression, you have to decide what hill you're going to die on. To me, there are major, clear, definite things in this passage that are non-negotiable, indisputable. And there are plenty of other things that are open for different interpretations that really don't bother me, that I'm not going to fight over. Now, listen, there are lots of fights you can have. If you want to have fights, there are all kinds of fights. Doctrinal fights within the church, outside the church, Jewish issues, cultural issues, social. There are lots of verses, battles, issues. I think it's wisest, let's just hold on to the clear, main, definite, and not waste time on lots of other things. So here are the principal objections as I quote from volume 3. Daniel 9, 24 to 27 has nothing to do with the Messiah. Now, these verses are not directly referred to in the New Testament, but Yeshua does make reference in Matthew 24 to Daniel's abomination that brings desolation. So it certainly has this passage